Welcome to the fourth session of the Maine Speakers Series. My name is Julie Goupille, and I realize that some of you may not recognize me because my hair is down and I'm wearing glasses. You'd be surprised how many people don't recognize me that I know very well from basketball games. This is my disguise. So welcome tonight. I thought Barry's idea to do these weekly Zoom sessions was brilliant until I agreed to do one. I think I much prefer making the presentations that TJ sends me look pretty rather than preparing them from scratch, but we're going to give this one a go. Thankfully, our executive director, Felix Adio, did a presentation on sportsmanship in Connecticut at the fall conference. So that is what I used as inspiration for this one. First of all, I would be remiss if I overlooked our veterans. It's Veterans Day. Those of you out there who've served in our armed forces, thank you. Thank you, to your families, the sacrifices you've made. We will never understand, but we're eternally grateful for that. So thank you very much, veterans. Happy Veterans Day. One of the NFHS's POEs this year pertains to sportsmanship. In the video that IABO, aka TJ, and RefQuest put together addresses the point of emphasis, but not in great detail. So that's what we're going to look at tonight. Most of us have been around long enough to know that the points of emphasis are the NFHS's not so subtle way of telling us that we need to do better at certain things. So since the Rules Committee feels that sportsmanship is something that we need to emphasize, then that's why we're going to look at it tonight. So the point of emphasis reads, the Rules Committee is concerned about inappropriate conduct by players, bench personnel, coaches, officials, and spectators. Each group needs to view the activity in light of it being educationally based and not accept conduct that would not be tolerated in other educational settings. Therefore, each group has the responsibility to demonstrate civility and citizenship. So my goal tonight is to get you to think. I hope you don't walk away from this session saying, Julie Goupille says this about unsporting conduct, or Julie Goupille says we need to tee up all the coaches. Instead, I hope that you'll walk away from this session with a better concept of what the NFHS and IABO think about sportsmanship and how they expect us to enforce it. I also hope that this presentation will be a reminder to you of what you can do to be in the proper mindset to deal with the criticism that inevitably comes with our jobs. And I'll be completely transparent, full disclosure, this is something that I struggled with all of my career, being in the proper mindset to deal with criticism. So I'm not preaching at you, I'm preaching at myself here tonight, right? Two trains of thought, very different opposite ends actually of the spectrum. Famous quote by Vince Lombardi, winning isn't everything, it's the only thing. And then the flip side of that is, it's not whether you win or lose, it's how you play the game. We understand the context that Vince Lombardi was in. It's the NFL, right? Doesn't get any higher than professional sports in our country. So it's understandable that he would make a statement like that. It's not everything, it's the only thing. The other side is high school sports, and that's our context. Perhaps some of you recognize this picture. I'm told that it was taken 43 years ago. Maybe some of you were at this game. Don't think any of you worked this game, but we remember this is Class A, right? Augusta, Coney playing Presque Isle, Class A state championship. It doesn't get any more iconic than that in high school sports. And we could hope that the motivational speeches in the locker room before the game were centered on this statement. And this statement was actually drawn from a poem written by a sports writer by the name of Grantland Rice. He worked in the early 1900s, mid 1900s, and the concept behind this is really what we need to think about, and what high school sports is about for us. Basketball has a very hallowed place in our culture. Some of you know I'm from Quebec. And when I got married and I moved to Maine and found out that they showed high school basketball on PBS, I was like, what kind of, this is madness. This is fantastic madness. And fun fact, I don't remember a lot of officials from then, but hey, they had a Gene Wilder, also known as Hawk Anderson, officiating the basketball games. That was fantastic. So since basketball has such a prominent place in our culture, it makes it harder for players and fans and coaches to keep the proper perspective. Most of the players that we officiate at the high school level will never play basketball beyond that level. And we need to remember that we have to help them keep the proper perspective. It's all right for Vince Lombardi to say things like he said, because that was the NFL. But we need to remember what's important about high school basketball. And tonight, I hope we will get a little bit of perspective on that. We've all seen headlines like this. Unfortunately, they're becoming more and more commonplace. Our culture has made verbal abuse toward officials socially acceptable. And because it's so acceptable, people are no longer drawing the line at verbal abuse. So the question for you is, and for all of us, to what extent are we to blame for the current state of affairs? Do we put up with too much? Do we overlook too much because we think it's said in the heat of the moment and, oh, they didn't really mean it? We need to really look internally and question our own motives and our own the way that we do things, and see if we need to perhaps shift our thinking about sportsmanship and how we enforce it personally. Has the lack of sportsmanship affected the athletes? So I did some research on this and found an article by Dr. Stacy Warner. She's a professor at East Carolina University, and she's conducted some extensive research about sportsmanship. Her studies have shown that the average child today spends less than 3 years playing a sport, usually quitting by the age of 11. By 13 years of age, 70% of kids have left organized athletics. 90% of the kids surveyed said the main reason they play sports is because it's fun. But when it stops being fun, often because of aggressive and unsportsmanlike parents and coaches, many kids just quit. Has it affected officials? Well, Dr. Warner's research further showed that sports officials are quitting our avocation at a rate of 20% per year, and that 80% of new officials quit after 2 years, citing bad behavior by parents and coaches as the reason. Are we partially to blame for this? There's no doubt in my mind that we are. Now, don't get me wrong. Anyone who is disrespectful or unsportsmanlike, they've made the choice to behave that way. I'm not trying to say otherwise. But at some point, when wrong behavior is overlooked too often, it becomes acceptable and the norm. So then when that happens, those of us who have chosen to ignore the wrong behavior or look the other way have to bear some of the blame. It's just the way it is. This was some of the first advice I was given as an official. It's very good advice, especially when you're on the court and you have the whistle in your mouth. You need to ignore the noise and focus on the game. But I feel that perhaps we ignore too much of the noise. And that's something we need to really guard against. Because if we're ignoring noise that is unacceptable, that needs to be penalized with at least a warning, then we are contributing to the problem. Do we have different interpretations of what too much noise is? Do we perhaps need to reconsider our interpretation of it? I think the NFHS has given us some really good guidance in the wording of the point of emphasis this year. They said that behavior, essentially, behavior on the sports court or field should always be behavior that would be acceptable in another educational setting, such as a classroom. So the way the coach is talking to us, would it be acceptable for the coach to talk that way to his principal in school? Or the way the players are talking to us, would it be acceptable for that player or that student to talk that way to his teacher in a classroom? That's the litmus test. And I think rightfully so, to a certain extent, officials take pride in the fact that they can let criticism and negative comments just roll off their back, right? Man up. Listen, I'm all for that. My husband and I raised 3 boys. And if you ask any one of them, they'll tell you that they've lost count of how many times I've told them, suck it up, deal with it. Life is not fair. That's the way it is. Yes, we need to have tough skin. But are we taking it too far and taking pride in how much abuse we can take? Do we maybe look down on those we perhaps affectionately refer to as Mr. T, who tend to rule more technicals than others? Well, I think if we're doing either of those things, then we are part of the problem. Tonight, I want to have a look at what the NFHS and IABO say, both at the national and state levels, about sportsmanship and its importance. Then we'll have a look at when and how it should be enforced, and the tools that we need to do that successfully. At the national level, the National IABO Constitution has 6 stated purposes. One of them is to encourage the spirit of fair play and sportsmanship. So our Constitution has 6 purposes, one of them is sportsmanship. I'd say that's pretty important. The mission statement. Now, until about a week ago, I didn't even know that IABO had a mission statement. I'm ashamed to admit. But on page 3 of our manual is the mission statement. It says, IABO trains and educates new and experienced officials who are duly charged with representing the spirit of fair play, integrity, and sportsmanship. Notice it doesn't say that they are duly charged with getting every single call right. Duly charged with representing the spirit of fair play, integrity, and sportsmanship. The statement goes on to say, by promoting the principle of teachable moments, IABO is dedicated to assisting schools and organizations in achieving their educational goals and furthering the ideals of basketball and officiating. There's that word educational again. We saw it in the POE statement. We're going to see it several more times as we go through this presentation. At the state level, the State Council has 5 sections under Article 2 purpose. 3 of the 5 purposes relate to character, citizenship, and sportsmanship. They are Section 1, to magnify basketball as a great game for building character, sportsmanship, and citizenship through the correlation of ideas gathered from the experiences of the various boards for uniformity in rule interpretations and mechanics. Section 3, to be that agency which recognizes any act or acts which contribute or deviate from good sportsmanship as we know it in our American way of life on the part of any official, coach, layman, school, organization, league, or team where basketball is or may be played. Section 4, to promote basketball as a game played for the educational purpose of developing good character and citizenship. So it's quite evident that sportsmanship is at the very heart of the Maine Basketball Council's purpose. I did a little bit of research to see if I could find an official standing, an official MPA stance on sportsmanship. And I couldn't find anything specific other than in the most recent Sportsmanship Committee meeting minutes. They defaulted to the NFHS sportsmanship course. So naturally, I took the course. It's free, takes about 10 minutes. I would suggest everybody have a look. It's full of really great stuff. And if you take it, some of the stuff that you see in my presentation will be in that course as well. When in doubt, go to the dictionary, right? So let's define sportsmanship. Merriam-Webster defines sportsmanship as conduct such as fairness, respect for one's opponent, and graciousness in winning or losing, that is becoming to one participating in a sport. In my line of work, I'm a translator, and my job is to ensure that the intent of a text in the source language is properly conveyed into the target language. Sometimes we have words that just, there's just no translation for it. So you kind of have to break it down and find out what the actual intent and meaning is in that context so that you can find the proper translation. So I took sportsmanship and decided that I wanted to dig a little bit deeper. Break it up into two words, right? It's a compound word, sportsman and ship. Sportsman, not real earth-shattering, one who engages in sports. But ship, the suffix, was very interesting when I found the definition for that. It's an art or a skill. I guess it's something that I kind of knew in the back of my mind. We all kind of know that. But when you really think of it in the context of sportsmanship being a skill is not something that we're born with, right? Unless crying and pooping and spitting up is a skill. Maybe it is. We're born with talents and propensity for things, but we're not born with skills. Skills have to be learned and practiced. And when those skills have been perfected, it becomes an art. So in the context of sportsmanship, that implies that sportsmanship is something that has to be taught and practiced, cultivated. Just like the players that were officiating had to learn how to dribble and how to do a layup, and they didn't do it right the first time, they had to practice it and do it over and over again. It's the same with sportsmanship. It's a skill. The NFHS and IABO both refer to sportsmanship and the spirit of fair play. So what does fair play mean? It just so happens there is an international fair play committee called the CIFP. It was founded in 1963. It defines fair play as a complex concept, which is perhaps why we struggle to put our finger on it, that comprises and embodies a number of fundamental values that are not only integral to sport, but relevant in everyday life. I thought that was very interesting that they add that there, that it's relevant in everyday life. So this is the stuff that the skills, the values that the players need for everyday life, all of us need for everyday life. It goes on to list values such as respect, integrity, and solidarity. Respect really, though, is the foundation for sportsmanship and fair play. If without respect, none of the values will be able to be demonstrated by anybody. All right, let's keep going. Back to the point of emphasis. We already read this, we won't read it again, but I want to get into what comes after it in the point of emphasis. There are 6 points. 2 of the points address game management. And it says basically that game management is the ones that are responsible for spectator conduct. My favorite line in the 2 points is, a game ticket is not a license to abuse. The NFHS is very well aware of what is going on. We need to remember that if fans get out of line, it's not our job to address them. That's up to game management. If game management isn't around, stop the game and find them. If you encounter a persistent problem of absent game management, talk to your interpreter. But it's not our job. Don't fall into the trap of engaging with fans. Nothing good can come of that. The next 2 points address coaches and players and specifically mention bad language. It's pretty sad that we have to specifically say that coaches shouldn't be using bad language, even if it's not directed toward anyone but their players. Again, if it's not acceptable in class, if teachers shouldn't be swearing at their kids in class, it's not acceptable in the gym. And we are mandated with enforcing that and ensuring that doesn't happen, or penalizing it when it does. Players are not allowed to swear or let off steam by swearing. It's not acceptable. It's just never acceptable under any circumstances. The last 2 points address officials. And it's very clear. It says we are not to tolerate inappropriate conduct from coaches and players. That's clear. What's not clear is, what do they mean by inappropriate? It's not always black and white, like the traveling rule, lifting your pivot foot before you start to dribble. But like every bank teller will tell you, how are they taught to detect counterfeit bills? By learning what real currency looks like. And that way, when the counterfeit comes, then it jumps out at them. That's the way it is for us. If it doesn't fall into the category of good sportsmanship, then it's not sporting conduct. I chose this picture of Bobby Knight for many reasons, most of them obvious. He's the poster boy for what not to do, right? But I also chose it for this reason. Consistency is key. One night a few years ago, an AA came up to me and he was frustrated because it seemed that we sometimes have a sliding scale. So, for example, Bobby Knight has a very high scale, right? When he's really mad, he's throwing chairs. When he's just a little bit mad, he's swearing at you, right? So one of the things that's really important for us as officials is to be consistent in what is inappropriate. So if it's inappropriate for this coach, it's also inappropriate for this coach, regardless of the fact that this second coach has the ability or the reputation to get really, really bad. So if it's only a little bit bad, well, it's still inappropriate. We need to be consistent. And that's why I picked that picture of Bobby Knight. If it's not throwing chairs, is it still inappropriate for Bobby Knight? Yes, it is. We need to be consistent. Everyone plays a role in contributing to good sportsmanship and the spirit of fair play. We're going to look at those roles real quickly. I do need to preface this section with this. I am not trying to pick on anyone. I'm not trying to be, nasty or anything like that. My goal here is to tell you how our authorities the NFHS and IABO expect stakeholders to behave. And officials are not excluded from this. They have direction for us as well. The NFHS Code of Ethics for Coaches says, the coach shall respect and support contest officials, period. Full stop, end of thought. The coach shall not indulge in conduct which would incite players or spectators against the officials. Public criticism of officials or players is unethical. I love this picture, even though Shoppy's in it. Skipper Ali. We know he can get pretty animated, right? But in this case, this was a game, obviously in the tournament, and Jonesport had just lost. And as the officials left the floor, Skipper Ali stopped them and shook John's hand. I think that really reveals true character. When the rubber meets the road, when difficult circumstances arise, when you lose, if you can still stop and shake the official's hand with what is obviously a look of gratitude and respect on his face, that's good sportsmanship. That's what good sportsmanship looks like. The NFHS sportsmanship course reminds coaches, you are a teacher first. Positively model your behavior for your student athletes. It goes on to say, do not try to control the calls in the game or argue them. By arguing officials' calls, you teach everyone around you that the outcome of the game is more important than teaching the players self-restraint. Folks, these are not my words. If the NFHS states this as their expectations for coaches, then we don't have to feel guilty about enforcing it or by penalizing them when they are not doing what the NFHS expects. We're bound to. We don't have a choice. That's the rule. We have to call a travel when they lift their pivot foot and put it back down. We're just as bound to penalize sportsmanship, poor sportsmanship. The player's role. We do what we do for the kids, right? No doubt about them. We teach them the rules by not letting them break the rules. Sportsmanship is a rule. In my research, I came across an article published by the Association for Applied Sports Psychology, and I really liked one of the statements that they used. Sportsmanship occurs when athletes show respect and concern toward opponents, teammates, coaches, and officials. And then it goes on to give some examples. Helping an opponent up after a play, accepting all decisions of the referees, encouraging less skilled teammates, congratulating an excellent effort by opponents. This picture I chose, my husband would be mortified. He's the photographer. And if you've got anything blurry in the picture, it's really not a good idea, especially in the foreground. But I put this picture in for a reason, and I didn't crop out the blurry person in the foreground because he's the subject of the picture. This was taken early, I think it was a quarterfinal, 2019 maybe, tournament. And this player, it was his senior year. He really didn't get a whole lot of playing time, but he was a big cheerleader, biggest cheerleader that the team had. And Caribou was up by a fair margin, so they put him in. And lo and behold, he sank a 3. Well, the place went nuts. And this was the reaction. Those guys standing up in the background behind the coach, those are the starters. That's good sportsmanship. They didn't have to do that. They didn't have to react that way, but that's a good sportsmanship. The NFHS sportsmanship course adds, sportsmanship is about personal responsibility. It's about self-evaluation and making choices upon thought, not impulse. I get a kick out of this picture. because of the look on the Deer Isle Stonington girls' faces. They're disgusted. I don't know if it's with the call or with themselves. I can't remember. But despite that, what are they doing? They're helping their opponent up off the floor. Again, that's what good sportsmanship looks like. And we have proof that teenagers are capable of displaying it. The fans' role. This was a difficult thing to nail down. It's not a whole lot out there. But I did come across something that the Ohio High School Athletic Association published. It's a brochure, and there's a pledge for the fans. In it, they have a whole brochure of expectations for their fans, but in it, there are two things that I thought was interesting. Show respect for the opposing players, coaches, fans, and support groups. Treat them as you would treat a guest in your own home. I thought that was a great analogy. Food for thought. And again, most people put this statement in there: a ticket to an interscholastic athletic event is a privilege to observe the contest, not to abuse the officials. So just as a reminder, it's not our job to address the fans, find game management. That's why they get the big bucks, right? To take care of unruly fans. The officials' role. Our IABO manual states, the function of every school system is to educate their students. In pursuit of these educational goals, schools sponsor sports programs that serve as a foundation for favorable messages that each participant receives as a result of their experiences. So then it goes on to list 9 favorable messages that schools are trying to convey to their student athletes. 4 of them are directly related to sportsmanship. Those favorable messages are good sportsmanship, integrity and fair play, respect for authority, discipline, and controlling emotions. So those are 4 of the 9 things that they're trying to teach their kids through sports. We are bound to ensure that that happens. And if it doesn't, or if something happens that prevents those things from being conveyed, we need to penalize it. It goes on to say that officials are responsible for assisting the schools in achieving these desired results. As key guardians of the game, I like that. Key guardians of the game. Officials are charged with maintaining the standards, dignity, and integrity of the game in a firm but friendly and approachable manner. There were few people that did this better than Bob Buckley. He had a way with people and diffusing difficult situations. A lot of respect for that guy. Miss him on the floor, that's for sure. Our board misses him. One interview I really appreciated in the NFHS course was by Greg Bowes, an official. He said, the contest is an extension of the classroom. One of the things we want to do with our kids is teach them to be good citizens. Basketball is part of the educational experience that we're pointing toward when they become adults. We said it before, the vast majority of the players that we officiate at the high school level will probably not play basketball, even at the college level, let alone pros. So for pros, sure, winning is the only thing. But for the high school student athlete, how they play the game is much more important than winning or losing. The things that I learned playing basketball in high school, and I'm sure most of you would say the same thing, those are lessons that I still use today. They were far more beneficial to me than any group project I had in class. So as officials, we need to do everything we can to ensure that the environment that the players are playing in fosters that educational experience. We are not exempt. We have the primary role in enforcing bad sportsmanship, but in many ways, we set the tone. Your job is to fairly enforce the rules of the contests impartially and to the best of your ability, Seek to teach the players the rules of the game. That's from the NFHS Sportsmanship course. It's also said one way that an official can do that is to explain difficult calls to players to improve their understanding. So players, coaches, parents appreciate it when we have an opportunity to explain a difficult call that the kids don't understand. My friend Pedro does that very, very well. He's a great way with kids. He welcomes the opportunity to explain difficult rulings, even though his explanations are not always well received. Being open and approachable helps players see that we're human and we don't think we're above them. What do the rules say? We've talked about the roles. We've defined sportsmanship, but what does the rule book say? The NFHS rules book defines an unsporting foul in Rule 419.14 as a non-contact technical foul, which consists of unfair, unethical, dishonorable conduct, or any behavior not in accordance with the spirit of fair play. Rules 10.4.6 and 10.5.1 list examples of unsporting behavior for players and bench personnel, including using profane or inappropriate language or obscene gestures, baiting or taunting an opponent, disrespectfully addressing or contacting an official or gesturing in such a manner as to indicate resentment, and objecting to an official's decision by rising from the bench or using gestures. So some of those things are no-brainers, right? Swearing, no-brainer. And it's not terribly difficult to rule unsporting conduct when it's directed at other players or even our partners. We're usually quick to rule on those things when it's against somebody else. But where some of us have more difficulty is when the unsporting conduct is directed toward us. We've seen it so far. There's no shame in penalizing the unsporting behavior. In fact, this year the NFHS is practically begging us to do that. The penalties listed under 10.5 and 10.6 include warnings. Use them. The NFHS gave us warnings a few years ago, and I think they're a fantastic tool for us to nip it in the bud, draw the line in the sand, give them a warning, tell them that they're crossing that line or they're getting close to that line and not to cross it, because if they do, next time it'll be a technical. You'll find a lot of times it will clean up the behavior. They see where the line is. They don't want to have to sit for the rest of the game. Most of the time that will clean up their behavior. Just as a side note, we need to remember that if we do issue a warning, we're not going to penalize the offended team by blowing the ball dead right away if they have an opportunity to score. So we'll wait until the ball is dead, or if the coach, we're going to warn the coach of the team who is in control of the ball, then we can blow it dead. But we just need to remember not to take a scoring opportunity away from the offended team. When warnings aren't enough, we have a signal for that, right? As Ms. Martin demonstrates so expertly for us, put the roof on the house. Do it calmly, do it professionally. We do it at the site of the foul, and then when we go and report to the table, we're calm and professional. Talk to your partners, make sure they know why you've ruled the technical, and make sure you get the procedure right. What's the procedure? 2 free throws by any player or substitute on the offended team with the lane lines cleared, and then the offended team gets the ball for a throw in at the division line opposite the table. So we've talked about the national and state expectations for coaches, players, fans, and officials. What type of mindset do we need to handle these situations? What tools of the trade do we need? Last week, Jeff Jewett gave us a short history lesson about the phrase, I know it when I see it, and how that shouldn't necessarily apply to contact. Well, I would have to say that that's different with disapproval, because we definitely know that when we see it, right? Let's look at the tools of the trade that we need to handle criticism. Enforcing sportsmanship is probably the toughest job that we have as officials. What do we need to handle criticism effectively? There are 4 tools. First of all, mental toughness, ability to handle pressure, ability to deal with criticism, and professionalism. Mental toughness. Mental toughness is directly related to the quality of our mental preparation. We got to prepare mentally for each game. That's why a good pregame conference is so critical. Every game, without fail, got to have that. That gets you in the right frame of mind to go out and officiate the game. How do you demonstrate mental toughness? You demonstrate it by being engaged at the game, concentrating and remaining focused on the game, controlling thoughts and feelings throughout the game. And if you can do those 3 things, then you'll have the proper command of your environment. Mental toughness is also directly related to our knowledge of the game. How do we deepen our knowledge of the game? Read the rule book. Read it, read it, read it. And when you're done reading it, read it one more time. Take advantage of the tools that we have available to us. Go check out our national website. There are all kinds of things that you can invest in. Hey, any job you have requires professional development, right? It's the same with officiating. There are tools out there that will help you get better and be a better official. Take advantage of those. The other thing is a basic understanding of the strategy of the game. We need to be a student of the game, not just of the rules. But if we understand the strategy behind what teams are doing, we're going to be better officials, because we're going to be able to understand what they're doing and anticipate certain things. That helps us tremendously, especially with off-ball coverage. Mental toughness also requires sharp decision-making skills. We need to be able to process plays that involve both rules and judgment quickly and effectively. We're not football referees, right? We don't have the luxury of taking out the yellow flag and throwing it down and then getting together with our partners and discussing, hey, what did you see? What did you say? Well, what does the rule say? Is that right? And then picking up the flag and saying, no, no foul on the play, sorry. We don't have that luxury. We have to make decisions like this all game long, thousands of decisions, whether it's legal or illegal contact or play. We're doing it all game long. We have to be sharp. And that is directly linked to the knowledge of the game. If you know the rules, then you're going to be able to apply the rules quickly and effectively when needed. We also need to have good communication skills. We aren't, nor should we try to be, best friends with every coach, but we have to be able to communicate professionally and effectively with them. Effective communication also means maintaining control of our emotions and being able to resolve disputes. Sometimes, because of the intensity of the game and just all kinds of different factors, sometimes it might feel like we're trying to communicate through a tin can connected with a string. And when that happens, we need to really refocus and try to have an open mind, don't be defensive. This is one I really struggled with. Listen beyond their tone of voice to find the underlying questions or concerns. I'm a really big nonverbal communication type person. Analyze facial expressions and tone of voice and all of those things. And all of that to me means a whole lot more than the words that you're saying. So that was something that I really struggled with We need to be able to listen beyond that, ignore the tone of voice and hear their question. Now, if they're getting, obviously, if it's crossing the line, that's a whole different story, but we got to look past that. Answer rules related questions. If they're rhetorical questions, don't take the bait, acknowledge them, but don't try to answer them. Don't try to get into a debate with them. But if they ask rules related questions, use rules based language. It's hard to argue with somebody when you say, well, by rule, this is what it says. And obviously, lastly, be polite. The second tool in our toolbox is the ability to handle pressure, and it's directly linked to our mental toughness. We deal with pressure and stress day in and day out. A lot of us do it all day long in our jobs. How we deal with those things will determine our level of success in a game. Don't let the stresses of everyday life affect how you deal with players and coaches. I know it's obvious to say that, but sometimes you really have to make that conscious effort to not let those things get to affect your game. Just because your boss yelled at you at work doesn't mean the coach is out to pick a fight with you. Control the things that you can control during the game, and for the sake of the game, shut everything else out. We look at that graphic, we can control nutrition. If you're the type that gets hangry, eat a protein bar before the game. Do something. You know you're like that and you don't want it to affect your performance, fix it. Lack of sleep. Go to bed early the night before a game. Just do it so that you're sharp that day. Stress of travel. In Maine, we don't usually have to deal with traffic, but we do have to deal with weather. Look at the weather. If there's a storm coming, allow yourself enough time to get to the game site in plenty of time. There's nothing worse than getting there just before you're supposed to be out on the floor. You have to rush through your pregame. Not a good idea. Control the things that you can control. And then for the other things, you need to have the self-discipline to shut them out. We need the mental toughness to ignore what we can't control and give the game our complete focus. Plan for the unexpected. We need to be prepared. And when we're prepared, we can better handle the unexpected. Anticipate plays. Use self-talk. It helps keep you focused, especially when you have a lot of other things on your mind. Talking in your head, talking to yourself, yeah, sometimes maybe it's the most intelligent conversation you can get. Talk to yourself. Tell yourself, okay, I'm trail, I've got to be here. Get an open view. Talk to yourself all game long. It helps you stay focused on what you're doing. Successful officials also read the rule book. Do you sense a theme here? We say it over and over, but it's true. Read the rule book. The more often you read the rules, the more ingrained they will be in your mind. And this is so, so important. Understand that you will make mistakes. Own them. You make a mistake, own it. It's an environmental hazard. It's going to happen. Perfection is way too heavy of a burden to bear. There are few things that will disarm an angry coach or player quicker than when you admit that you were wrong. Coach, if that's what happened, then I am sorry, I missed it. Or, you're right, I blew it. I'll do my best not to let it happen again. It's true of life in general. Being able to admit and actually believe that you blew it is one of the hardest things to do. And admitting it just might disarm the angry coach. I need to make a disclaimer about the picture here. Mr. Cunningham did not make a mistake. He was just explaining to Skipper Alley why he had to call a technical foul on the Jonesport player for changing his bloody uniform within the confines of the bench. I chose this picture because Sean has just a calm and cool demeanor. He was just even keeled throughout the whole process, explaining what happened. He was great. That's the demeanor we need to strive for. Third tool is the ability to deal with criticism. Criticism is an occupational hazard. It will come. It's going to happen. Just remember that criticism is usually given by people who are looking at the situation through biased lenses. Oftentimes, officials are the only unbiased people in the gymnasium. It's just the way it is. Everybody has an emotional stake, except us. Don't take it personally. If you take everything personally, you will be offended for most of your life. Sometimes, though it pains me to admit it, the coaches are right. Sometimes they did have a better angle than we did. Sometimes we should listen to what they have to say. What if we shifted our attitude and really objectively thought about what they were saying? Anyone who has known me for more than 5 minutes knows that I hate being wrong. But I learned, perhaps too late in my career, that I am often wrong, and I need to admit it. And I need to not take things personally. Keep your cool. What was that ad? Never let them see you sweat. Take the high road. Even if you've had to call a technical foul on somebody, sometimes creating distance can help you keep an open mind. And I just put a mark on there and I don't know how to get rid of it. Oh well, it's going to stay there. To summarize, remember that most criticisms are biased. Some people are critical by nature. And when the criticism crosses the line to unsporting or disrespectful conduct, penalize it calmly and professionally. The last tool in our toolbox is professionalism. And I'm still making. Professionalism is more than competence. Competence is just the minimum standard. It's not just what you know, it's how you behave and how you treat others. Professionalism is another one of those you know it when you see it things. One of the most profound statements that Felix made in his presentation in Connecticut in reference to professionalism was this: players and coaches don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. I'm quite certain that no coach or player in any game that Hawk has officiated in his career had any doubt in their minds that he cared about them. We should all strive to have the same impact that he has had. So we've covered a lot tonight. Let's summarize quickly before I wrap it up with a challenge. Now, I certainly don't want to diminish the significance of our current health crisis, but I don't think it's too much of a stress to say that our country is in the midst of another type of pandemic. We have a pandemic of unsporting behavior. It's so bad that the NFHS has asked us to crack down. This pandemic is having a significant impact on kids' desire to play sports. The hostile environment at even the lowest levels of sport is driving athletes to quit much too soon. It's also having an enormous impact on recruiting and retaining officials, and we bear some of the blame for that. Sportsmanship is a skill that needs to be taught, practiced, and cultivated by every stakeholder: coaches, fans, players, and not least of all, officials. The IABO national and state constitutions and missions mandate us to enforce unsporting behavior rules. It's no different than ruling a player control. And lastly, we need to remain poised and professional in the face of criticism and unsporting behavior and handle it appropriately. In conclusion, what more appropriate graphic for the county girl to use than a potato, right? But as I said at the beginning, I hope you don't walk away with this as your main takeaway. I'd like to shift gears just slightly and turn all the negative we've discussed into something positive. Many boards, just like ours do, give out good sportsmanship awards or banners each year to a school in their area. Every game that we officiate, we're supposed to give a rating for both teams. But there are a few times in my career when teams from downstate came up to the county and displayed really good sportsmanship to the point where I felt they needed to be recognized. So, and since we don't rate them, I decided I would send a quick email to the AAs to commend the teams. On 2 occasions, I got very moving responses from the coaches. I'd like to share those with you tonight. The first story was from 4 or 5 years ago. Team came up toward the end of the regular season. They were not going to make the tournament, and they were playing one of the top seeded teams in their class. They were a younger team, and for 3 quarters, they gave the home team everything that they could handle. They even led a lot of the game. But in the 4th quarter, the wheels kind of came off the bus for them offensively. However, despite the adversity and the intensity that their opponents displayed, those players, those young players, kept their composure and never lost their cool. And most importantly, they always displayed respect for us, even when there were some tough calls that they didn't like, that didn't go their way. They displayed respect for us and for their opponents the entire game. And that's what I commended them for. Here's what how the coach responded. Thank you very much for taking the time to send the note below. I want you to know that I read your message to my team. It truly meant a lot to us. We are a young team, and we have struggled at times this season to keep our composure and maintain mental toughness. I am sincere when I say that receiving your note was as good as winning a game. It means a lot to me and our coaching staff and players that you took the time to write it. The last story I want to share was similar, except it took place early in the season. The game went down to the wire, and the home team won in what was considered an upset. But I wrote to the AA of this team from downstate and commended them that they kept their composure despite the intense nature of the game. Now, I didn't say this to the AA, but the same could not be said for their opponents. Their opponents did not display good sportsmanship at all. But the visiting team maintained their composure. It was amazing. They every time we handed them the ball, they would smile and say thank you, despite the fact that things were not going well for them. The team was a class act. Here's what the coach said. Thank you so much for the kind words. In 8 years being involved with varsity athletics, coaching both soccer and basketball, no official has taken the time to do something like this. I will certainly be sharing your words with the team today, as truly it's a testament to them buying into expectation. So here's what I leave you with tonight. Yes, we need to enforce the unsporting conduct rules that we have. But as a state, I'd like to see us try to do something positive that I feel will have a far more reaching impact than 1,000 technical fouls. The 2021-2022 Maine Good Sportsmanship Challenge from me to all of you. I would like to challenge each official in this state to, at least once this season, recognize an individual act of good sportsmanship by sending an email to the school. Maybe there's a coach who backed you up on a ruling when a player disagreed, or a player who always had a smile and a thank you when you handed them the ball for the throw in. Maybe there's some really great scorers and timers who are very professional and unbiased. Or maybe there was an entire team that just displayed great sportsmanship. I want to challenge each of you to find one thing that you could send a brief, positive email to the school about. And if you do that, I would recommend that you email the AA rather than the coach. You want to say something nice, tell the boss. They'll let the people know that need to know. If you do that and you get a positive response, would you mind sharing it with me? This is my email. I'd love to hear the story of good sportsmanship and the reaction, most importantly, from the team. With that, have a great season. Thank you for listening to my droning voice for over an hour. You all deserve a medal for that. Have a good night.